Hello, everyone. Hello, you guys. My name is Ivory Smith, and I'm a program associate here at the Transgender District. Thank you all so much. We really, really, really appreciate you guys coming out for this beautiful event with Raquel Willis, the beautiful and talented Raquel Willis. I'm going to be introducing the president of the Transgender District and co-founder as well, and icon, Aria Sa'id. And last but not least, the beautiful and talented Raquel Willis. I would like to give a huge shout out to Piano Flight. Thank you so much for allowing us to have our event here. And I will gladly ask everyone to please silence their phone as we record this event, please. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Hello. Don't that look kind of fly? Can someone get a photo of that? You know, I'm feeling very Tina Turner. Just kidding. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be back in the Bay.
This time in San Francisco, though.
Right. Because I was an Oakland girl, so.
Fruitvale.
Don't be giving. Well, I don't live there anymore, so it's fine.
Well, first, before we dive in, I have a list of very juicy questions to guide our conversation. And so for our live audience, first of all, thank you so much for being here. Give a round of applause for yourselves. This feels amazing. This is our first in-person event since Omicron. And so we're very grateful that you all came out, that everyone's vaxxed, ready to mingle, that the world is turning and that we're just adapting. And so, yeah, thank you to everyone that's made this event possible so far, to the team at the Transgender District, to Piano Fight, to Hunter and Aaron on the cameras, and many more as I get these questions. And so I will have some questions that the team came up with, but I would love, we'll have a session towards the end, naturally, that you all can ask questions as well. And so I'm hopeful that y'all have the very juicy questions that need to be asked. So I got my Diane Sawyer wig on today, and we're trading places. So Raquel normally has interviewed me, and now I get to interview you.
I know, I'm a little scared.
Well, I thought we could ease in nice and easy.
Love that.
So what has life been like so far in the last 2 years? So this week is the 2-year anniversary of when the CDC declared COVID as a transmissible virus and that we needed to lock down, we needed to stay at home, we needed to quarantine. What has happened for you over the last 2 years?
Wow, that's a big question. I know that's like a big question for everybody. What has happened? So really the weeks right before the pandemic was like official. A whole like gaggle of us were laid off from Out Magazine. So if you don't know, I was executive editor at Out Magazine. During that time, I was really honored. Actually, 3 years ago this month, we did our first women and non-binary femmes issue, and the district was featured in it, so that was exciting. So that was one of the times I interviewed Aria and Honey and Miss Janetta, amongst other folks. So that was a great time. But yeah, a gaggle of us were laid off from Out Magazine. So I never know like how much I can say because it's, you know, whenever there's like a huge layoff in media, there's like all of this like secrecy around it because nobody wants to like get in trouble, implicate themselves.
Well, I'll say it. There were lawsuits and things that were very public.
It was very public, yeah. Things were reported on. So when I started at Out Magazine, I didn't really have an understanding of like all the things that had happened behind the scenes. Like there were people within the New York bubble who kind of knew like um, freelancers weren't necessarily getting compensated, so that was a whole thing that our crew kind of came into. Um, Other vendors and folks, so it was a really weird time because I was excited to be there, and we were like the most diverse staff that they ever had. But of course, you know what always happens once they finally figure out, oh, we need people of color in leadership, we need trans people and non-binary people and folks of all different backgrounds. It's really to kind of clean up shop after all of the mostly like white cis gay men who were there before kind of used up all the resources, you know, just to be frank about it. So we really had about a year when I was there working with Phil Picardi, and we were able to we were cranking out really great stuff, obviously, but it just wasn't sustainable. And so I started the pandemic not really knowing what was next, not knowing, you know, if I was going to try and find another position at another magazine. I really wanted to work in queer media, but there were only so many spaces to go. It was a really difficult time, but I think what sustained me was staying connected to community. So knowing that I wanted to kind of elevate what trans communities were doing to remain resistant and resilient through the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. So for instance, the district, you know, I wrote this piece for Zora magazine, which is like this medium publication, and the district was featured in it, and different nonprofits, because I was really inspired by work like what was happening here. This district was really one of the first organizations to push for COVID-19 mutual aid relief. I mean, I don't think people realize that, but we were having conversations, and it was folks here in the Bay, trans folks, Black trans women, trans folks of color, who were really pushing us into a new paradigm around mutual aid. And I mean, it wasn't really new because queer and trans folks have always done that. We've always had to take care of ourselves because our government sure as hell doesn't give a bleep about us, regardless of the administration. Let's be very clear about that. And so I was inspired by those things. So I wrote about that, but also I think once George Floyd was murdered, and then I'm not being cavalier about what happened to him, obviously, but I think in the general public saw social justice as a sexy thing. And maybe not even necessarily the general public, but like the media gatekeepers. And so I realized in this like New York bubble I had been in for like 2 years, where I came in with all of this like social justice sensibility that was informed by my experiences here in the Bay, my experiences on the ground in Atlanta. I really was not respected when I first moved to New York, y'all. Like, I would go into spaces, they'd be like, who is this? You know, who is this random person who doesn't have the credentials, who hasn't had like the media internships? Because I didn't have that. I was grinding in my journalism career. And it was really a pivot when I started working in nonprofit communications. And none of that was respected in the way it's respected now that we've had this kind of general social justice awakening. And now it's sexy to know the activist and know all the right things to say. I mean, we see it on Instagram every day. You know, everybody wants to be a political educator. And it's like, okay, but like, who are you connected to outside of that screen, outside of that little phone you're on?
Right. What's your theory of change? What's your political education? Like, where's your political home? Especially now in social media, I think everyone's an activist just by virtue of making a post. And it's fascinating to me because I'm like, who have you studied under? Like, what community organizing have you done? Like, that's the real activism. But yeah, activism is sexy in 2020. You had pivoted from out
I have pivoted from out. I have been working on my memoir for a while, at least the version that I thought I wanted to write about. But I think once I realized how hungry people were for discussions on social justice, I wanted to give a perspective of what this first and maybe second iteration of the movement for Black lives was like from my perspective as a Black trans woman. And at least the perspectives, again, that were informed by the Black trans folks that I had built organizing and political camaraderie with. So I wanted to give that because I think we've heard a lot from cis Black folks about what the movement for Black lives is all about. I mean, nowadays, I don't want this to sound like I'm like griping, but nowadays, there are a lot of Black cis leaders in particular who will claim to be so pro-trans, who really were not platforming and elevating trans folks over the last, almost decade. Let's be clear, and that is a problem. Like, so many of us have been screaming to be seen, to be heard, to be credited for our frameworks and our theories. I'm sorry, you don't have your current kind of Black queer feminist tradition without Black trans folks. You just don't, right? We may not have libraries full of like theories and all of this stuff, but our knowledge is from our lived experience, from the things that we have imparted through oral history and tradition, for decades, because we've been outsiders for so long, even from the people that's supposed to be our people. So that's really, I think, what initially informed me kind of pivoting with my memoir to talk about what my vantage point has been coming into a social justice work versus what I was really initially working on was more of like a kind of traditional transition memoir. But, and there's space for that. Like, there's space for us to talk about the before and the after and all of that. Like, we need those narratives, but, I have to give it up to people like Janet Mock, and even other people I've learned about along the way, like the Lady Chablis, Black trans women in particular who've written memoirs and told their stories. I don't have to cover the 101 anymore. And even, Janet said as much to me at one point when I was telling her about what I was working on. She was like, but I did what I did so that folks didn't have to worry so much about that 101. Right. And there were constraints even on her to tell her story. Almost 10 years ago now was when the Marie Claire article first came out, where she had to kind of hold people's hands. I don't have to hold people's hands in the same way that she had to, and that's a beautiful thing.
So 2020, there was a pivot from out, there was a pivot in sort of the racial reckoning is what people call it in the United States. And more specifically, you were building and organizing for more intentional accountability and frameworks in the racial justice space for Black trans women. And then this big, giant moment, the elephant in the room, happened in Brooklyn.
It did.
The march. So for those who don't know, what was the march called again?
It was called Brooklyn Liberation, a march for Black trans lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so there were the clips of you, of course, going viral. I love that clip so much, especially because just knowing you over the years, but and your journey and evolution, not just as a woman, but as an activist, as a thought leader, as a writer. But But that moment of like in front of, what was it, 15,000, 20,000 people, something like
There
that?
are estimates of up to 20,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, I had goosebumps seeing that clip. And I know you've done interviews with Vogue and everybody about that moment in particular. What was your thoughts when you were speaking? But if you could just indulge us, because I think it's, I sometimes, as someone who knows you, I don't know if you fully have digested that moment will live on for the next 100 years. That moment is like an I have a dream speech, that, you know, you are leading so many frameworks and so many ideas and being a voice for so many of us, that that moment like lives on and grows. And, you know, obviously maybe we're not meant to digest those moments, but what was that moment like for you? Because now we've heard that audio so many times. Raise your hand if you've heard that audio that I'm talking about. I believe in our power. I can't remember all the words, but, you know, Black trans power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us about that moment? I mean, just indulge us.
Sure. Yeah, okay, so I'll tell about the lead up too. So the lead up, you know, the initial architect of the Brooklyn Liberation March was West Dakota, a drag queen in Brooklyn. And she had conversations with Fran Tirado, who I worked with at Out Magazine once upon a time, and Eliel Cruz, who at that time was working at the Anti-Violence Project. And the idea really was to build a container so that Black trans folks could be elevated, because they were acutely aware that it is often difficult. Well, like, we often don't have the extra energy to expend to be inspirational and uplifting to community, because we're trying to build the freaking march. You know, we're trying to make sure people are hydrated and, you know, that we have a safety team in order. You know, all the like kind of fundamental pieces of building direct action. And, you know, we just don't often have enough energy to kind of put the fine point on everything to get all the people we want out there, you know. So I have been a part of numerous marches over the years, and, you know, you'd be lucky if you got like 20 people to come out, especially around Black trans lives, right? We just didn't always have a number. So they wanted to build a container to kind of elevate us, but they did bring in Ian Field Stewart, me, Cayenne Dorshow, Black trans folks to kind of inform, right? And make sure that it was the right container. And then we were going to be on the roster to speak. I didn't know what I was going to say. I mean, I think in all of the kind of hoopla of like trying to actually get the march in order and like supporting them with the organizing, because some of them had never done anything in a direct action before, except maybe showed up. I didn't really know what I was going to say. And it's weird. It's like you want to write a speech, but then I also know I hate this idea of like having to recite things and make sure that it's like respectable. Excuse me. That it's like respectable and that it's, you know, polished and like all of this stuff. Like you want it to sound perfect. And a lot of it is rooted in these ideas of like these perfect speeches, like the I have a dream speech or whatever. Right. So I didn't really have many things down. I had a few bullet points down. And when I got up there, I was like, I'm not going to read off my phone because I don't have anything to read off of, because obviously I hadn't really written much down. But I wanted to be present and feel the moment. And I think what kind of flooded in my mind as I kind of took a deep breath before I talked to all these people that we didn't even know there were going to be that many people. We thought maybe we get a 1,000 maybe or something, but we hadn't really talked numbers. But we could tell there were a lot of people in that audience. I just kind of took a deep breath and hoped that the ancestors and transcestors would have my back, You know, I thought about all of the like anguish of like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, but I think also of all the like victims along the way, those stories that kind of pushed me to want to live a life more in tune with the values of like authenticity and vulnerability. So like it was deaths like Leila Alcorn's death. It was China Dupree or China Gibson, her death. It was Remy and Raya, because that had just happened. And they had just been murdered in the course of us building the march. But I also just thought about all the institutions I was angry at. You know, this huge national nonprofit industrial complex of LGBTQ plus specific organizations. I make it a habit to not say their names because we know who they are. And, you know, I'm not giving them more name recognition and press. But I think about them, and I think about how overwhelmingly they're still ran by white cis people. Not even necessarily queer, let's be clear.
Sure.
You know, being white, cis, and gay, and being white, cis, and lesbian, and being even, you know, white, cis, and bisexual does not necessarily mean that you're queer, right? I mean, you can also be trans and not necessarily have a queer sensibility politically. Let's be clear about that. And I thought about those institutions. I thought about the decades of infrastructure that they had built out, the pieces of legislation that they have been a part of that they had excluded so many of us from. I thought about how many of them didn't have specific funding and still don't to target the epidemic of violence plaguing Black trans people, but they'll mention us in their speeches. They might have a line about us in the annual report, but it's like, where's the funding and the resources going? Because it's not actually going to us. It's going to you to maintain your hegemony. And that is a problem. It's still a problem. Even as I'm going to go on a tangent, but even as I look out into the conversation around the Don't Say Gay bill, which I hate that framing and that messaging because it completely erases that trans people are the most under attack right now, including trans youth. Right. Trans youth are more under attack than cis queer, cis gay, cis lesbian, cis bi, etc. folks right now. Like, and we can't even name that, right? I mean, all of the legislation that was being pushed last year, specifically targeting trans folks, it was like pulling teeth to get these mostly cis gay and lesbian-led organizations to pay attention.
Or to prioritize it.
Yeah. And that bothers me. It bothers me that we still have this problem going on and nobody wants to talk about it. We're walking on eggshells. Why do I want to walk on eggshells for organizations who completely ignored Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson when they were alive? What sense does that make? Why should I be afraid? And I know that I'm lucky now to be in a position where I don't have to rely on the nonprofit industrial complex to an extent to have a livelihood and to survive and be able to do the work that I want to do. But I think with that comes needing to be honest about just how damaging that system is. That's my tangent. But anyway, all of that passion, I think, all of that rage, those were the things that I was thinking about as I was coming up to that dais. It wasn't really a podium, but it was like the balcony at the Brooklyn Museum. And that's what I wanted to invoke. And I hope I did. And I felt a lot of shame backwash afterwards because I was like, that was completely unfiltered. That was like a version of myself that like, I don't think I had showcased in public in that way and to so many people. And it was recorded. And exactly like you said, people are gonna, Yeah, because, I think.
Because I was like, oh, she went there. When I saw, I mean, first of all, you had your afro, very like Angela Davis, blaxploitation film, afro
No.
moment.
Cleopatra Jones.
Yes. And you named and said the things that I think trans people in this country had been feeling for quite some time. And we hadn't heard someone message that in that way to thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
And I will say, the other part of it too is because I work in media, my background is in journalism, I was very aware of how my message would be clipped to be appealing to the masses. And so I've seen times where they've uplifted the Black Trans Power chant and they've completely left out the I believe in Black Trans Power part. Right. They'll do the first 3 lines. They'll do I believe in my power, I believe in your power, I believe in our power, and completely clip out the Black Trans Power part.
For LGBT media, I do only hear the I believe in our power. It like echoes on Hulu and stuff. But
yeah.
But we know how much that moment meant to so many trans people who may not have been at that march, but got to see it on their phones and, their screens, and seeing it even just replay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt good. I mean, I had looked out into the audience and saw all these folks, just random folks, and everyone had gotten the memo. They were wearing white. It was an homage to an NAACP silent march that was around anti-lynching, and that felt good. And I looked over to Eliel Cruz and I was like, I think more people are with us than against us. Like, that's how it felt in that moment. And that summer felt like a revolution was happening.
It's true. Even here, we had a march with Susan Stryker, Courthouse to Compton's, and thousands of people came out. I mean, I think it was an awakening for so many. I'd never seen so many white people gathered in the streets of my life outside of the Irish festival. Sorry.
Or a football game.
Right. And so,
or a rock concert.
Seeing them during that summer, I mean, I know you saw it in New York. We saw it here of, Black Lives Matter and Say Their Names. I'd never seen so many white people fill the street like that. Yeah. Consistently. And even though that moment has come and gone, I think, folks have abandoned the black square on Instagram. They're like, we donated to the orgs, to the Black-led orgs. We shopped at the Black-owned businesses. And now we're going back to our lives. And so it's been 2021, especially for Black-led, Black trans-led movements and initiatives. It's been such a switch. Because in 2020, we got all these affirmations. We love you, we love you, we love your work, we want to support, can we volunteer? And then, it's 2022, we ain't heard from nobody. But,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was disappointed in the immediate aftermath of that summer. And a lot of things were going on. I think the election lead up really kind of clipped some of it because these elections kind of call for you to have to compromise even before you go into the ballot box because you're like, what is my strategy to at least make it to the next side?
Right. The lesser of two evils.
Yeah. But, I think what I learned from that moment is maybe the revolution isn't just one moment. Maybe it is an ongoing kind of unfolding phenomenon. And we'll have our moments and, hopefully we'll be able to lessen the distance between those moments moving forward.
And now our voices are heard more than they were before. We see so many more Black trans people who are more visible. That doesn't always translate to power. That does not always translate to resources or access. But we are seeing that, you know, we are at least a little more considered than we were before 2020. And we've seen more emergence of Black trans voices. And I think what's important is, you know, the march in Brooklyn, you know, this time they didn't cut your mic off like Women's March did.
That was a thing. Great lead-in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, do people know that?
From Oprah to Wendy.
Right.
With the quickness. Yeah, I don't think that a lot of people know that. So I spoke at the National Women's March in 2016, and yeah, they cut my mic before I finished my speech. Yep. And as far as I know, I think they may have cut other people's mics. I'm not sure, you know, I haven't really heard much from other people who it's been claimed that they've had their mics cut off, but I mean, it was just kind of reflective of like
the time. I mean,
kind of the times, but I don't give.
They were
just
starting to include trans people in
this kind
spaces.
of national feminist discourse, but I don't give them that. I don't give people leeway to say, oh, it was the times, all of that. No. But I will say, I think it shows how disposable some women are, some groups of people are, even in social justice formations, you know? So, yeah, who's going to care that you cut the mic on the Black trans woman?
Right.
You know,
because then they'll say we had a trans, y'all saw it.
A trans. It's true.
I mean, let's be real.
It's true. And you know, and I know who made the call to cut it. And you know, she's a Black woman who is very respected in some Black social justice spaces, and so that was also another moment of like, even within these groups
and
that
people
are
we've
supposed to have
looked
our
up
back,
to. I mean, we were young when that moment.
Younger.
Yes. But you know what I mean? I mean, we're still young. I know. But, you know, these were folks that we were also looking up to in some regard.
I won't say that I was looking up to her.
Right. Okay.
But no. And that's not to be shady, but we're not going to go all the way down this, but there is a way that some people who are deemed leaders move through all types of spaces as if they have the same cred there that they have on their home turf. Right. And so just because you have this cred in New York doesn't mean that you carry the same weight in my heart and in my organizing history as someone from Atlanta or someone from Oakland even, or San Francisco. You don't carry that same weight, you know, and that just, you know, it's weird. It's almost like hip hop where it's like, do you have the cred or do you not? And I don't think that that's necessarily okay. I don't think it's okay that our kind of progressive spaces are always trying to figure out who has the right cred, because it's another form of that kind of purity of like, who is deserving to be heard, who is deserving to lead, and we shouldn't be moving that way. But it is true. That is, I think, how a lot of people are navigating.